Tonight on Cosmic Cantina, I managed to get an exclusive interview with Daniel Sheehan, the lawyer for Luis Elizondo. So we explore the ins and outs of what might be coming down the pipeline for the UFO UAP phenomenon. But could a public announcement of contact with alien races be on the cards, or will the government run with the story of threatening technology from an enemy state? Who knows, but we're going to speculate wildly regardless. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and every week I go to my favorite bar, Cosmic Cantina, and kick back with my co-hosts, Josh Golembeski and Matt O'Connor. We talk about aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, ancient cultures, and anything from the unseen world that needs a little illumination. Welcome to Cosmic Cantina. I'm your host, Melissa Tittle, and tonight I'm drinking stem cider.
Ooh, classic.
Uh-huh.
It's one of my favorites. Well, tonight I picked up myself this morning, I picked up myself a breakfast wine, and it is called Demon Dance. Ooh. And it was the artwork alone got me. Not a great wine, but great artwork.
It's great for breakfast, wine, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool, Connor. Well, cheers to... I'm drinking random red wine in a mason jar again, but cheers to Matt coming back to the States in the next couple of weeks. So the next podcast we do will be all U.S.
We'll be back. I guess we should mention that we might break for next week.
I will be...
Yeah, Melissa and I will be on vacation.
We will be on... Yes, we'll both be on vacation in Mexico.
Nice.
Florida for me.
Never mind. Florida for him. All right, so tonight... we got a special guest. But before I talk to you about our special guest, I know this podcast is a little late, but I'm sure everyone listening to this has watched the 60 Minutes piece on UFOs, UAPs, what could be in the sky. I mean, that's pretty huge. Don't you think, guys? I mean, and in fact, all the articles leading up to that also, where it's like all the news organizations are trying to get a piece in before 60 Minutes got their piece out. We also had Jeremy Corbell releasing the video with the underwater kind of sphere that stopped over the water. It was going at fast speed, stopped over water, and then dropped into the water slowly. If any of you are following any of this, things are really heating up. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's ramping up for sure. I've seen just one thing after the next, particularly with Luis Elizondo, who we're obviously going to mention in a little bit. But he's been on, I've seen him on CNN, I think. He's been on a bunch of different stuff. His interviews have popped up. But yeah, it's ramping up.
Well, I thought that piece was nothing new for people deep in the space.
Correct.
But there was a couple moments that were super exciting for me. One was in the middle, the pilot who saw the gimbal footage, or he said that every day for years he encountered these things in the sky.
For like
that's a huge...
Yeah, 2 years or something. It just
2 years straight.
Yeah,
that's more evidence to like my wild theory that it's happening, more than people realize. I thought that was super interesting. This whole thing got all the boomers excited too. 60 Minutes has an older demographic, and I felt like that was really important because they all got shook. It was like, oh my God, the crazy stuff is real. And then at the end of the 60 Minutes, Marco Rubio had intense eyes. He had these big eyes, and he was like, it could be Russian or Chinese, or maybe it's something otherworldly. And he just, like, the way he said it, you were clearly like, obviously option A was not really an option for you. You just had to say that. So
I think he's auditioning. I think he's auditioning for Ancient Aliens. That's what's happening. He's like, you know what? That Giorgio guy's got to go. I got to, I'm going to be on Ancient Aliens now. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, his hair is nowhere near good enough. But our guest tonight's hair is good enough. Best hair in the UFO
best
world.
Best hair ever. So tonight... Luis Elizondo, we just mentioned him, but he is all over this space. As you know, he's tied to the Tic Tac videos. He's part of TTSA. He's part of a lot of controversy. In 2020, we covered this a lot in our podcast where we talked about and articles talked about the fact that, was Luis really credible? Did he actually work for the military? They were trying to discredit him. Well, now he has a lawyer, Daniel Sheehan, which I have an interview with Daniel coming up here, and he had some really interesting things to say. Why he's representing him, what's happening in the government with the releasing of all this material, why Luis is kind of stuck in the middle of it, and maybe some things to come.
for the people who don't know who Daniel Sheehan is, he's been involved in the UFO phenomenon for 30 years. He was actually associated with Greer for a long time. And the interesting thing going on right now, and I think it's interesting for the context of this interview, is that he was with Greer, and Greer has been calling Luis Elizondo a disinformation agent. But now Daniel Sheehan is representing Luis Elizondo, and that is highly compelling. And hopefully this interview sheds some light on it.
Right. And Daniel Sheehan is a very respected lawyer. He's a constitutional lawyer. He talks about that in this interview, about some of the people that he's covered before. So I think you're going to find this really fascinating. I know that Daniel Sheehan has done some other interviews, but this is a little bit different. So check it out. Daniel Sheehan, thanks for joining us.
Terrific. Thank you, Melissa.
All right, so let's get into it. What was your decision-making process to represent Luis Elizondo?
Well, I, like everyone else, saw the initial December 16th online New York Times article by Leslie and Ralph. And I was at the time, I was up at Standing Rock, up in North Dakota, working on the Dakota Access Pipeline and defending Chase Iron Eyes up there. So I saw it. And I knew about the To the Stars Academy people that were involved in getting that released. And I knew all the parties. I mean, I knew Leslie, I knew Ralph, and I knew the other guys. And so I was so busy at that time up there at Standing Rock that I hadn't, weighed in on it. And then what happened is the certain people inside the Defense Department, as you probably recall, started issuing public statements asserting that, well, there's no such thing. There's no such program. Luis Elizondo had no relationship with any such program. And it was kind of bizarre. So there was this whole back and forth with representations being made by certain people inside the Defense Department, indicating that somehow Luis Elizondo was not telling the truth about the videos. They didn't even acknowledge that the videos were genuine. So there was this whole period of confusion that went on in there. But when it got settled down and actual officials from the Defense Department acknowledged the validity of the videos, that became an entire second round of news, a news cycle. Oh, wow, now look, the Pentagon has actually confirmed this. But there were still elements inside the Defense Department that kept on, strangely enough, asserting that, well, it wasn't true. And then they started taking the position that Luis Elizondo was misrepresenting the mission of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Project. He was misrepresenting his relationship to it. He was misrepresenting his past military record. I mean, those are things that cause military people to be very sensitive about misrepresentations about their service to the country. And so he got very upset about this and began to inquire about who the best legal representation might be to protect him against those kind of misrepresentations. They were threatening not only his general reputation, but they would be threatening his security clearance. And in fact, those elements inside the Defense Department did in fact succeed in reinitiating a review of his security clearance, which he'd already had just very recently re-upped and affirmed. So he was distressed about this. So he called me and we began to have a number of conversations about what the best process was to follow, because he was most interested in just getting it stopped, getting him to stop doing that. He wasn't intending to have any kind of confrontation with them or anything. And it was fairly similar to my previous representation of Dr. John Mack, who was the head of the chairman of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, when people started accusing him of certain types of misstatements or misconduct a number of years ago. And I was retained by Dr. Mack at that time to cure that problem. And so
now, back to Louise, why do you think the back and forth though? Because I did read that New York Times article where they were trying to
discredit him, and maybe he was crazy, and maybe he never actually served in the military. I remember reading that article.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now he's on 60 Minutes. So why the back and forth? I mean, it actually doesn't look very good on the military
Well,
to kind of pawn this guy around. So I just wanted to know, I mean, what do you think is the purpose of all this?
well, the back and forth has been a consistent pattern with regard to this issue of the UFOs, which they now call the UAPs, the unidentified aerial phenomenon, in the Defense Department. Now that they have actually gotten willing to say something about it, other than we don't know what you're talking about, none of these things are true, all the people that are doing it are crazy, all that stuff. So there was very clearly a change, a sea change inside the Defense Department and the national security state about what they're willing to say about this. But it did seem to be triggered by the public release of these 3 videos. And it was clear that that Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and a number of other people played a role in getting those films made available to the public. And also, Lou had been instrumental in getting a ruling from the Defense Department that none of those 3 videos were classified, and that they were allowed to be released for public dissemination. So there were some people, obviously, inside the Defense Department that didn't get the memo that these were specifically, officially, legally authorized to be revealed to the public.
Very strange.
So they turned around and went after Lou, implying that he had illegally somehow released these videos. Now, it was a difficult task for them because they didn't want to admit that the videos were real, that they were actually secret information, allegedly, in the hands of the Defense Department. And so that you had this peculiar dynamic going on where there were elements inside the Defense Department asserting that he had somehow violated his security oath by releasing these, at the same time not acknowledging that they were subject to any kind of classification, and also suggesting that he wasn't even employed by the Defense Department. So there was this very significant state of confusion that obtained for some weeks around that whole release.
So it sounds like some people want it out and other people are trying to keep it under wraps.
Yeah, well,
there's infighting on the whole situation of the UAP thing. It's coming out really strong right now, but then there's still this kind of undertone of, is it?
Well, it's interesting. It's one of the things that Lou is trying to clarify right now is what is the degree of consensus inside the higher authorities in the Defense Department pertaining to this subject, because it's clear that there are elements inside the Defense Department that have still got they're way behind the power curve on this thing, and they basically are not briefed in on whatever the policy is on the part of the Defense Department anymore. And one can appreciate the fact that they're confused because there have been different points in time over the years when Defense Department personnel took different positions about this. And I think that's still going on. This is a period of some significant confusion, you might say, inside the Defense Department. And what Lou is trying to do is to have me assist him in getting some clarification of what the level of hierarchy is inside the Defense Department with regard to what the official position is here on this issue.
Right.
And so that Lou is hoping to be able to play a constructive role in getting that clarified inside the Defense Department.
Almost as if he doesn't have a choice, though, because now he's in the spotlight. And I feel, maybe there's something you can clarify, I feel like he has more to say. This is just the tip of the iceberg of what he might know.
Well, that would be a logical assumption. since he was the director of the whole program. But for example, given the complexity of this, it's not perfectly clear yet whether or not he had been briefed in on all the levels of security pertaining to this particular subject. There's an argument, for example, that some of the people are making apparently inside the Defense Department, that this establishment of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that he was the director of was basically just a not fully thought through response on the part of the Defense Department to pressure from Harry Reid and other senators who wanted to get something done about this issue. And so they ended up appropriating $22 million and putting it into the hands of the Defense Department and saying, here, the Senate is requiring you to look into this. And there were a whole lot of people that were in the Defense Department that didn't want any type of public review of what information they had or didn't have about the UFO phenomenon. And so some people inside the Defense Department were looking at that U.S. Senate authorized, in fact, U.S. Senate mandated investigation as something that they did not have to treat seriously. And they were just figuring that the senators would go away on that, especially since Harry Reid was going to be
didn't.
Yeah, they were going to be retiring, and so that they may not have briefed Lou in on all of the information that's available, and Lou, of course, would not be in a position to know that, and so given the peculiar history of the Defense Department and various divisions inside the Defense Department in dealing with this thing, it's not surprising that this has not gotten perfectly clarified yet. So there are, and for example, there are 3 different Inspector General investigations going on about the same issue here, and it's not clear at all that they're in communication with each other, and all of them are asking Lou to come and testify and provide information to them. So we're obviously still in the process of trying to determine where the actual highest level of authority is that's actually weighing in on this issue right now, because there may be subdivisions of the Defense Department that are working at different odds here, and so we're hoping to help clarify that.
So if they are bringing up these issues with Louise, then it would give more credence to the fact that there is something that maybe they didn't want the public to know. Are we back to that whole thing that they're debating if he crossed some lines and that we're not supposed to have seen these UAP videos? Is that kind of where this is going? Or did they want to release those?
Well, I think it's more complex than that. I think that there are some people in positions of authority in the Defense Department who are not only willing but desirous to have more information released to the public about this.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think they want to release it? Let's just say all of them want to release it. What would be the main goal?
Well, if all of them wanted to release it, it'd be an easier thing to try to figure out.
True, but like, what would be the point of releasing it? Versus not releasing it, right? Obviously, we know not releasing it is because they want to keep the control. They don't want to admit maybe they don't know something. But what would be the goal to release it? What advantage does it give them?
It's been obvious for people who've been involved in this particular subject for as long as I have, and I've been involved in this sort of officially since the spring of 1977, and so that it's obvious that there has been not a perfectly coordinated program coming from the Defense Department, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and others who have been on again, off again about this whole subject, and that they're engaged in some sort of an attempt to feather into the public culture information about this subject. And again, one of our objectives in this is trying to figure out, where they're at in that particular strategy right now. have they come to a new position where they want more of the information out, or they want it out on a more accelerated basis? It's not clear. One of the things that Lou and I both are trying to be very careful about is we're trying to ascertain what the kind of demographics are of the internal infrastructure of the Defense Department right now with regard to this policy, because we don't want to do anything that is being undertaken blindly, and so one thing he did know is that these particular videos, the 3 of them that are at issue with the New York Times account and all of that, that these are something that he thought were so persuasive that he thought that this would be an important thing to release to the public. Now, obviously, if there are 3 or 4 or more subdivisions functioning inside the Defense Department that have different positions on this, his action reaching out to the official section of the Defense Department to determine whether they wanted to declassify this or whether it was classified at all. And he got an official ruling on that before he did anything. And once he got the official ruling that it was available to be released to the public, they still were not authorizing him to release it to the public, which was a conflict.
Right.
And so what he did is he resigned.
Like they're looking for a fall guy in case the whole release of UAPs is a total fail by the government. They're like, well, this guy, he made it all up.
Well, it's not entirely unlike Oliver North that you may remember.
Yep.
That Oliver North was an intimate actor in the policy that was part of the Reagan administration. And George Bush Sr., as his vice president, who was the head of the 5412 committee of the National Security Council that handles covert operations, had an entirely different agenda, in fact, than was being publicly acknowledged. And so you had this problem of duplicity right at the very beginning. And so Oliver North was following his orders and doing exactly what he was instructed to do by the chain of command. And yet, all of a sudden, the Attorney General of the United States, came forward and had a big major press conference, throwing him under the bus and saying, right. Somehow this renegade lieutenant colonel has run off and apparently gone around and recruited old retired CIA and Pentagon weapons specialists from the golf courses around Virginia, to form this whole independent operation, which was a total lie. And so that what we're doing is we're confronted with something similar to this. And what happened is Oliver North, as you recall, basically refused to fall on his sword. He said, no, I'm not, you're not going to do this to me. I've been following orders and I'm willing to tell you who gave me the orders and what I'm supposed to do, et cetera. And so the whole administration became sort of destabilized, because you had an honest man who had been doing consciously dishonest things in Oliver North. Now with Lou's a fundamentally honest guy, but he has security clearances. He's legally obliged to keep certain things secret. And so if he's ever confronted by someone in the public asking him about something that he's not allowed to talk about, he has two options. He says, I'm not allowed to talk about it, or he can say, I don't know what you're talking about.
Those are 2 choices.
Those are 2 choices. And so
right.
that's why he resigned. He said, look, I don't want to be kept in this kind of conflicted position. I know that these videos exist. I know they're authorized to be released to the public. I have access to them. And so what he did is he set up a meeting along with Chris Mellon to meet with Leslie Keene, who's just as honest as the day is long. I mean, Leslie has been at this forever.
Yeah.
And so she became a really important person to be trusted with the release of these. And then she reached out to Ralph Blumenthal, who was a reporter for the New York Times, to get it put in the Times. And so there's a whole series of extraordinarily interesting questions here.
Mhm.
for example, what was the process by means of which the New York Times made a decision to put this right on the front page? After all the ridicule that they've been heaping on the UFO issue for decades, how did that decision get made?
But that's what I mean. I just feel like there is such a movement to get it out there, and it's like I want to know why. I mean, I love it, obviously, because I've been in this field for a while too.
Yep.
But is it because there's this argument in the field, right? Is it threat based? Is it because they want us to know because something might happen in the future? I mean, I don't think you have the even answer to that, but it's just interesting to talk about because now the train has left the building. Every news organization is covering it.
Yeah.
The New Yorker had a 12-page article with Keene in it, talking, and that's something that would never be in the New Yorker. And now 60 Minutes. So
one of my job with Lou is to get this clarified. That's what in filing the major federal lawsuit that I filed, and my office filed with regard to Oliver North and the Iran-Contra thing, was to get that clarified. What's going on here? Is the Reagan administration officially delivering weapons to the Contras in complete violation of a congressional law? If so, is that an impeachable offense? What's going on here? And so our objective is to clarify this, and that's Lou's objective. Lou wants to do only the things that he's legally authorized to do, but he wants to do everything that he is legally authorized to do to help get information out about this, because he views this as an extraordinarily important issue, and he views it as an important issue for a number of different reasons. And that's why, until we get this thing clarified, it's going to seem to be confusing.
What are the number of different reasons?
Well, for example, that if in fact you have a phenomenon that is entering, you understand, the national security state has a particular perspective on the world, which is sort of paranoid, dialectical. The old saying, and I've quoted it, it's an old Sufi saying, that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And that people that are inside the defense establishment and the national security state are trained and tasked to view the entire world as a threat. And it's their job to protect the nation state, or at least elements within the nation state, from these types of threats. It's a very different consciousness than regular people have, right? And so when you enter into that national security state infrastructure, you start to adopt that particular attitude. So all you have, for example, all you have to do is have a vehicle flying, say, way out over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the national security state says, wait a second, we haven't authorized that. And you say to yourself, well, who are they to have to authorize that or not? It's not even inside their airspace. And they say, well, no, we've designated that as a protected zone unilaterally. And any vehicle that flies into that or comes in as a ship on the water or under the water has to be authorized by us. So that's a very narrow point of view.
Yeah, seen as a threat.
Yeah, so anything that comes into that space without their authorization or their prior knowledge, they start treating as a threat from a bureaucratic point of view. And
because that's their job. So that makes sense. That gets out there like that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a threat. It's just that's their job. And these are the people that are reporting it. So that would make sense. 100% makes sense.
Elements inside the Congress, for example, which after all is the government of the United States. The executive branch is not the government of the United States, no matter what Richard Nixon might have thought or Richard Cheney might have thought. There's a case on this, Youngstown's Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer is an old case that was decided by the United States Supreme Court, saying, let's get clear here that the government of the United States is the Congress. The executive branch is there to carry out the law and the orders of the Congress.
What does Congress want? Do they want?
But it is true, and it is true that inside the Constitution itself, there are certain prerogatives that have been designated for the president. one of which is dealing with international relations and foreign policy of some initiatives. And so the question is, does the executive branch view this as falling under their aegis of foreign relations with some other civilization? Well, they aren't going to acknowledge that.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, they aren't going to acknowledge that, but the president can assert that. And they also say, well, they have the responsibility for protecting the security of the country against foreign adversaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so do they view the UFO phenomenon as a function of some potential adversaries? And of course, the answer is yes, because that's how they perceive everything. But it doesn't make them a threat. And there's a lot of confusion inside the national security infrastructure right now, because obviously this phenomenon, 99% of the time, is acting in a way that doesn't pose any threat at all. In fact, they're acting in a way that's completely contrary to being any threat. They follow around airplanes. They get out of the way of airplanes. They don't crash into airplanes. They don't go landing on the White House lawn. They don't. But on the other hand, they do certain things. And for example, that they have demonstrated, and this is absolutely true, and it's not revealing anything that Lou would think is a violation of his security clearance.
Mm-hmm.
He knows from conducting his own investigations that UFOs, actually absolutely legitimate UFOs or UAPs, have flown over the top of our nuclear weapons sites, Minuteman sites, and have demonstrated that they can and will shut off all of our missiles. They have shut off all 24 missiles in a given Minuteman silo, which are all independently wired, independently. And so they've shown they can do that. Now that, from the point of view of the national security state, freaks them out, because that is viewed as a hostile threat. Now, which sounds a little peculiar, because to turn off weapons that are a mortal sin to even possess, according to the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops and the National Board of Homeland Ministry of the Methodist Church, the mere possession of nuclear weapons is sinful, because they're inherently designed to kill civilian populations. And it's a complete violation of the rules of warfare. And yet the United States has them, and they're poised and they're targeted on civilian populations. And so if someone were to come and shut those off, who's the violator here? Who is the hostile actor here? And so that this is something, as a constitutional lawyer, that I am able to provide some counsel on. And I've been legal counsel for the Jesuit order and the Catholic Church. I've had conversations with fairly high-level people in the Vatican about these kind of issues. And so that these are the kinds of important conversations that need to be undertaken by our citizenry in a democracy. And the problem is that the national security state won't allow any of this information to be released. Their instinct is to shut it off all.
You just touched on a really interesting topic in this conversation, which I did not think I was going to go into. But do you think, this is total speculation, right? So the UFOs, UAPs show up and they shut down missile silos.
Yep.
Are they doing it to show us that we need to come up with a different plan of action? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any UFOs that have fired on anybody or hurt anybody, right? It's just they're showing their power. Is that to make us reevaluate? I mean, that's a really big question, but you just really touched on that in this moment.
It's a big question. There's a joke I would say is, I don't get paid to guess. what I get retained to find out.
I do, so I can guess.
No, you do. And so what I say is that my job is to find out the answer to that. Is to figure out what it is that caused that. What were they up to? Who are they? Obviously the they is completely important here. If this is Russia, coming in with some super high tech to shut off all of our missiles, or China, or India, or Afghanistan, or whoever our latest national security state declared enemies or adversaries are.
But if it's not, and it is they,
and this constant huge elephant sitting in the middle of the living room of this entire subject we're talking about is that if there exists another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed but distinctly non-human species in our galaxy somewhere, and that they have achieved superluminal flight capacity, and they have got the technology to come and go into our airspace, quote, our airspace, and shut off nuclear missiles, does that make them an enemy, or an enemy of whom? It may make them a perceived adversary of the national security state, which you might guess that it would. But on the other hand, if they come and go all around the oceans where we don't have any official jurisdiction, what business is it of the national security state to be telling them that they can't do that, or that it makes them an enemy if they come and go, say, out of the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you know? But on the other hand, if they're observing this off the shore of San Diego, 100 miles southwest of San Diego in the Pacific Ocean, and they see a vehicle come in from outer space, and they pick it up on the radar at 80,000 feet, and it comes down to within 50 feet of the surface of the ocean within less than 1 second, and stops, and then slowly submerges and goes 100 knots under the water. This freaks out the national security state, because they're saying, wait a second, there's some sort of technology here that's functioning that is so vastly beyond anything that we have ever seen.
There's talks about the fact that the government already knew that, whatever you believe in, right? Roswell, you name it. There's all these sorts of instances where the government has seized some kind of possibly crashed UFO, UAP.
Well, see, the problem is that there's a conceivable thing, and it's possible they did this. You can't conduct an investigation like that. That you have to get answers to those things, because the what flows from the different answers are completely different. And so that my job as a not only a constitutional lawyer that has to be cognizant of the respective areas of proper jurisdiction for the national security state, the executive branch, and Congress, and the people, ourselves, as a constitutional lawyer, but as a professional investigator who has conducted major investigations over the past 50
Only
years.
The facts.
That you need to go with the facts, and we need to figure out which of these options seem to be operative, and figure out what the alternatives are to what the alternative answers are to a particular question. You have to figure out what the questions are. You have to get all the questions laid out in front of you and figure out what the logical alternative answers are to that, and then probe them to find out which one has the highest levels of probability. And I happen to have been trained at that with Lawrence Tribe, who is the preeminent American constitutional authority in the country right now. I studied evidence under him, and he applies different mathematical formulas and trained all of us to do this as to how you conduct investigations. And so what I'm engaged in with Lou right now is an investigation, a continued investigation that he was engaged in. What is the origin of these particular phenomena? What are their capacities? What does the Defense Department know about it? How much of it does the public know? What type of misrepresentations have been made by people in the Defense Department in the past? What is their policy now? What is their policy now? Is there a collective policy inside the Defense Department? And if so, what is it? Because Lou needs to know this in order to determine whether he's acting in a way that's consistent with the official policy, or it isn't. And so that we're at a preliminary.
Maybe they haven't decided yet. Maybe this is the infighting we don't know about, and that you're trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And Lou
is amazing.
Wants to know that. And so there's as you probably know, there are at least 3 major full-scale investigations going on right now inside the Defense Department's Inspector General's office to answer some of these questions. And Lou happens to be central to all of them. and I represent him in that. So we're attempting to be constructive. We want to assist in clarifying all of these things. This is such an extraordinarily important issue for our human family. We're talking about the next, 5,000 years of human history here, and what our relationship may be with an extraterrestrial civilization in species.
But it also defines what it means to be human. And as a constitutional lawyer, that is your job.
Well, also as the legal counsel,
what the rights of a human is.
Oh yeah. Well, as former legal counsel for the Jesuit order, the largest order in the largest religious denomination in Western civilization, there are profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by this, and I want to participate in getting those answered. Or more importantly, I want to participate in stimulating that conversation like we're having right now. This is not a conversation that we could have had prior to the release by the New York Times of these videos, and more is coming out. So this very thing that we're doing right now is exactly what Lou wants to do, and he wanted me to assist him in doing this because I've done this regarding other major issues.
Right.
So that's what's really happening here, and so it's not like regular lawyering, here. It's not that I'm getting set to sue the Defense Department or put somebody in jail or get somebody impeached or something. That's not what I'm doing.
You're just getting answers. Who are we?
I'm working.
Who are we as a human race, and where do we come from?
That's right.
Those are big questions to answer.
They're profound questions, and
You're
the problem
a very busy man.
and the problem is that the national security state doesn't view those questions as being relevant to what they're doing. So they have too narrow a focus on what the issues are here. And so what we're trying to do is to get other participants in our constitutional human order to weigh in on this, to all get to participate. We don't need people who think like a hammer and everything looks like a nail to them. We can't have these people making these profoundly important decisions for us that are going to affect our relationship potentially with another sentient species in our galaxy, that are going to affect us for the next 10,000 years. And this is a critical point in our human history right now. If this other possibility is what's going on here.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. You have a lot of work cut out for you, and I applaud what you're doing. And I think a lot of people in this community do. And a lot of people that are watching this are wanting answers as well. And that's why they're still watching and they're listening. So I know that by the time this airs, there might be a million things that have come out, but I really appreciate your time.
You're more than welcome, Liz. Just call me anytime.
I thought it was really interesting that he, we kind of know that the government's always, there's factions of the government that don't like each other. And, this is why things get confusing when information comes out. But he broke it down a little bit differently than I've heard before. And I just thought that was fascinating that there are factions, according to him, there are factions that do want this information to come out and there's factions that don't. And it seems like Luis is kind of stuck in the middle. I just thought that was fascinating from his point of view.
Absolutely. What do you think, O'Connor?
Yeah, there was a bunch of different stuff that he talked about, but it made me think of some of the stuff that that related to that 60 Minutes piece as well, which I think were pretty pertinent. I like, Melissa, how you were trying to get him to kind of speculate on what he thinks is going on, but he's very lawyery, so he didn't really do that at all.
He pushed back.
He's like, and I can't answer that one, Melissa, and I'm going to talk about something else.
Yeah, but I thought what was really interesting is that there was a point where he kind of hinted that, Elizondo has a bunch more stuff to say, and it's not the time now for it, but he's got a few more truth bombs to drop which is, I was like, ho, hello, disclosure, what's going on? Or disinfo, depending on how you feel about all this.
Maybe it's both.
Yeah.
Cheers.
It's both. Either way, we're getting disclosure. Yeah, I love that interview. I think it was amazing, and he is so credible and interesting, and he has real contacts. He's really in the mix, and I'm just honored that he was on our podcast. One thing he said that was really interesting, connects to what I'm going to talk about, was that the security state or the generals were only worried about the threat and not the bigger questions. Mm-hmm. And that's all they really cared about. And that kind of sat with me because it's like disclosure's in the wrong hands. Like it's all wrapped up in the Department of Defense because they have the money to investigate it, which I'm going to get to in a second. This has happened throughout history multiple times. And like it's just the wrong vehicle because like they're not answering the bigger questions. Like they're not asking like why are they here? Who are we? And all this stuff. But their research does kind of answer some of those questions. They're not concerned with it is what my point is. So
it's not their
what did
job.
I get into? Yeah, exactly. You can't really blame them. They're literally trained to be paranoid. So they're only thinking about threat and what it could be and how it could affect our national security. So you can't really you can't hate on them. My opinion's changing about the government doesn't know what they're doing. They're holding it from us, blah, blah, blah. It's just so much more complicated than that, as we all know with all these issues. It's all gray. There's no black and white. It's just gray. So I've been researching and just trying to find what is going to happen with this disclosure. Like, what are we going to learn? I don't think we're going to learn everything right off the bat, obviously, that we talk about. It's going to be a slowly dripped out. But, like, what does the government know? What do they really know? And I was like, where's a document or something? Give me something where I know exactly what they know.
Yeah.
And what I came across was something awesome. And this guy's older, but everything he says is what we're saying today in modern ufology. Maybe we've been saying it all along, and my awareness has just grown. But everything he said was awesome, and it comes from the 60s. This guy is a legend. He's passed away now. He's with the rest of the ufologists who have passed away, with Stanton Freeman and Philip Stone. No.
Clifford Stone.
Cliff Stone. And then this guy who's passed away too, his name is Commander Sergeant Major Robert Dean. Woo. Robert Dean was in the military for like 28 years. And he looks like Sean Connery. He could be Sean Connery's like younger brother, who's like just as handsome and charming with a ponytail. Remember Sean Connery later in life had the ponytail and Medicine Man and thing? He looks just like Sean Connery, but like less aggressive. He's definitely love and light and gentle.
Yes.
Military background. Yeah.
Yes, very, very. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not, And so this guy in the 60s worked for this organization called SHAPE. This is all real. This is all verified. SHAPE is the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe. It's a NATO organization.
This is not in Star Wars. I swear to God, this location. This is in Star Wars.
I know, SHAPE. That kind of throws me off. Like, really? Was there really a SHAPE? There was, and I think there still is. So he earned a cosmic top secret security clearance working in this one center, because he worked at the command center. And he had access to a vault. In 1964, his life changed forever. He came across a document in the vault that was like 10 annexes long, had multiple different sections, which I'll get to in a second, called the assessment, and then had a bunch of things after that. The assessment of blah, 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 threats against blah, 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 blah. And it was all based on the UFO phenomenon. Before I get to the details, a little backstory. Basically, this is the Cold War, and in Europe and Russia, they were constantly tracking silver discs, largely flying in formation, coming from Russia, going over Europe, and disappearing over the Norwegian Sea. Now, the Soviets were obviously picking these things up as well, and at first, both sides thought it was the other side. So it was causing a lot of tension. Like, World War III almost started because of UFOs. And there was one particular incident in 1961, February 2nd at 2 a.m. Yep, very specific on that. Where...
Was it in March?
There was February.
I was close.
Almost. Almost.
Okay, sorry.
Almost.
close.
I think it was like the 20... I think it was the 28th or something like that, too. So, yeah, it was close. Yeah, almost March.
Oh, my God. It was like a day away. Okay, sorry.
Right, it was March somewhere else in the world. No, you're right. Your theory's totally right. So these UFOs almost caused like a war that night. Both sides were high alert. They sent up jets. It was this whole thing, and it all subsided. It was like 15 minutes where literally World War III was going to happen. Long story short, the commander at the time, the head of NATO, the Secretary General of NATO, was like, this has got to end. These are obviously not Russian or ours. We got to figure out what these are. I want to study. So he funded a study that took place over 4 years. It's from 61 to 63 or 4, and that's when Major Dean read it. Now, this stuff, before I get into the study, what's really fascinating based off this guy's research after the fact is like the government already knew this. So what they studied was one branch of the military. So you have to ask yourself, how many different branches did their own thing? Are they all sharing? Is there different special access programs that don't even talk to each other? How much is going on? It's so varied. So multiple organizations could have all come to the same conclusion and never talked to each other. That's why I'm fascinated what's going to happen next month. What did we learn from this? It's almost everything we talk about today verified in the past. And I've never seen anything all in one document like this before, but this is basically what he learned in this 10 annex thing. It was broken down to like, here are all the events that have happened. Here's all the research, who they are, why they're here, what will happen if we disclose this to the public. And there was other sections after sections. And
So
he goes on and on about it.
Who do they think they are?
Well, at the time, they identified 4 different species interacting with us. 4. By the time he got out in 76, they knew of 12. Today, they're saying it's over 100. Now, the fascinating thing about this is, out of those 4 species, 1 apparently looked exactly like us. And we've heard this before. Not Nordics, not ridiculously, supermodel blondes, but these are just normal humans. And that really made the generals paranoid. That's what actually really motivated them to really study and really get into this. Because like, geez, how do we even know? They could be in the White House. They could be anywhere. That's terrifying. And they're naturally trained to be paranoid. So they were really worried about that. It was kind of the impetus for the whole thing. But what was fascinating about this, some of these species, they're going to say are thousands of years ahead of us. And the more advanced the species was, the more likely they were to be multidimensional. So there was species that were coming from a different planet in our galaxy, from a different planet in the neighboring galaxy, and then from different dimensions. And basically, the more evolved they were and the more advanced, and generally the more benign and love and light they were more and more likely to be multidimensional. But some species were only 40 or 50 years ahead of us, they're claiming. So that's crazy. So imagine us like in 40, 50 years, are we going to fly around to planets in our solar system and be like, what's going on down there? Let's butt probe someone.
Imagine the iPhones they have.
That'll be your ancestors.
Right, yeah. Just butt probing, fast talking dicks. Okay, so what else did he learn quickly, just to go over this? Because like there's so many details in this, it's unbelievable. But this is what he says, and this is stuff we talk about today. This was all in this document, that there was a process or a plan unfolding over thousands of years. These ET, multiple species are involved in it, not just one. Multiple, and it's all about genetics. We are a hybrid species. From the beginning, not they're trying to make us into a hybrid, or hybrids are slowly trying to infiltrate us. We were started as a hybrid species. Basically, they were flying around 100,000 years ago. They saw Neanderthals or apes, and were like, that's going well. Were they here before then and made apes happen? I don't know. But from this document, they're saying that they saw that, and then they made us in their image.
That's very Anunnaki,
Oh,
stuff.
it's all over this. Yeah, they don't say the word Anunnaki, and they never bring up giant, bald dudes or giant people. They just bring up a race that looked exactly like us. So with same stuff, they genetically manipulated us. They're still doing it today for whatever reason, but they're not hostile. And the generals, that's why the generals don't really care. They at no point have they really shown that they're out to get us, and they could at any time. But we know that, right? And the last part of the study, which I thought was interesting, well, we all know this, but in it, basically, they said, humans can't handle this. We're going to deitize them or create gods out of them like we did before. The document claimed that all major religions were based off the UFO experience or the alien experience, which, I've been saying that for a while. I don't mean to offend anyone who's listening who's religious, but like, that's what we say today, and it was all in the document in the 60s, even before. So they're scared to let it out. And apparently there was another study by the Brookings Institute that Margaret Mead was a part of, apparently, that also kind of said this too, like the humans couldn't handle it. Now, I disagree with that, but that's why they never released it after 64. And there's 3 copies of this document, apparently. But that's what I went into. Basically, it verifies everything I've researched and heard all in one document. And I thought that was fascinating, especially since I hadn't dove into the work of Sean Connery before.
Zardoz, yeah.
I think The Rock was his best movie. I love that movie. Okay, Matt, what do you got?
So, well, I wanted to, the whole idea when Daniel Sheehan was talking about like the government and the Defense Department and stuff were really taking a kind of a tactical view on this, of this being a threat because it's their job. I was trying to think, are we sure if it's not aliens? It would be pretty amazing if another nation state somewhere in the world had this technology too. That would be a fucking huge deal. Is this technology possible? So I came across a video that kind of led me down this path, and it was about an anti-gravity researcher from the early 90s. Her name was Dr. Ning Li, and she was a Chinese-American researcher at the Center for Space Plasma and Aeronomic Research at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Okay?
Okay.
So,
Wow, that sounds really smart, but since it was in Alabama, I'm like, maybe.
No, that's a there's a huge base down there for a lot of this stuff.
it's a big,
okay.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
Josh. So, she produced, back in the early 90s and all through the 90s, she produced a series of these peer-reviewed papers that apparently theorized a practical way of creating anti-gravity technology. And I kind of stumbled upon this, and I want to give a shout-out to a YouTube channel called Barely Sociable. He sort of put together this really awesomely produced little piece, and he does a bunch of these videos. But he researches it, and it was really nice little produced 20 minutes. I recommend you check it out. It's pretty interesting stuff. But he's sort of put together this video, and it kind of got me started down the rabbit hole. So Ning Li. So the research she was into wasn't necessarily anti-gravity. It was more described as gravity manipulation. But having looked into what this could do and the potential for it, it's pretty safe to say that it could lead to anti-gravity technology for sure. So the basic theory is, and I do have to add this caveat, that I am no way a quantum physicist, a scientist.
Oh, I'm surprised. I thought you were.
Yeah. I'm not a gynecologist. But
What?
here's my basic understanding of how this works. Okay, so here goes. The theory is...
Can I just say
Based on
something?
the-
Wait, hold on a second.
Sure.
Why
Jump on
are men gynecologists? I mean, that's the last thing any woman wants to go see is some guy who says they know more about her vagina than she does. Okay, I just have to say, it's just odd.
Well, we have a lot of interest in that area. I'll say that.
It's just-
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
Fascination.
Since that is your
It's
study.
a fascinating thing.
Not a quantum physicist. Okay, go on.
I'm not a scientist. Okay. So the theory is based on the idea of superconductors, and it's basically a substance that can conduct electricity with zero resistance, so that energy goes into this thing and it's not lost at the end of the process. So from beginning to end, there's there's zero loss in energy, which is fucking amazing. Usually this works by supercooling a specific substance, which causes an expulsion of this substance's gravitational field. And it's similar to magnetism, I guess, if you ever see this. There's a bunch of experiments online where they do this. It's like a liquid nitrogen surrounded object, and they sort of balance a piece of metal on top and other stuff, and it just kind of floats there. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so Dr. Ning Li comes along with these claims that she can achieve this process, with this force field-like effect that happens without having to supercool this superconductor. Because obviously having to supercool something is really fucking impractical if you're trying to bring this into the public sector as, technology that we can all use,
Right.
So, Ning Li. So here's what she basically claims, and this will be the end of my little science talk on this role, since I don't really know what I'm talking about at all. So here's what she says is basically happening. So she says she claimed that the anti-gravity effect could be produced by rotating ions, creating a gravitomagnetic field perpendicular to the spin axis. All right, are you with me? Are you with me so far?
I am.
So
Yes.
in her theory, if a large number of ions could be aligned, and she lines them in this thing called a Bose-Einstein condensate, something. The resulting effect would be a very strong gravitomagnetic field producing a strong repulsive force. The alignment may be possible by trapping superconductor ions in a lattice structure in high-temperature superconducting disk. Okay.
Sounds like my morning bonus.
Sure.
It sounds like you
To each their own.
and your gynecological studies.
Yes.
I love that. I love that you're
I've
reading
gone
this with
into-
your breakfast wine. You're like, I'm not a
I
scientist.
know. Breakfast wine.
Okay,
Listen,
Matt.
if you don't believe in breakfast wine, it is a thing. You can believe something hard
So
enough, you
after
can
all
make it
that,
happen.
after you've murdered all that quantum physicist crap, tell us why this is
All right.
so. I mean, this does sound how a UFO would functions, how we think it functions, right? In using
Yes.
free energy and that kind of thing. So
Right. So spinning these ions inside
Right.
something that's super cooled is the basic outcome. But she and other scientists who followed her research also apparently have a way of doing this without having to super cool this object, which is great. So, and it made me think of also in that 60 Minutes thing, there was a really fascinating description that one of those pilots gave of a sphere with a spinning, I think he described it as geometry inside it. It
Yep.
reminded me of the idea of a Merkaba, if you know if people in our audience know what that is.
Kind of like the
but
movie
it's-
Contact.
Yeah.
Remember
Yeah, a
in
lot like
Contact,
that,
that's how
actually.
they traveled. There was all that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Spinning things inside of it. Yeah. Anyway, so enough science. I'm getting dizzy. That could be the breakfast wine, though. So after this, during the late 90s, obviously a bunch of scientific publications got hold of this because these were peer-reviewed studies that she was releasing. So she was sending them out to other scientists. They were recreating her theory, going through her maths, ticking all the boxes. Said, "Yeah, this seems legit. Your numbers are correct here." So peer-reviewed
Wow.
things were getting released. So later after this, media and publications, including Popular Mechanics, actually had a big story on this as well. They kind of latched onto this idea and ran a bunch of stories, and they kind of hyped this thing as like this new big technology that was going to be released that was going to, really boost our humanity's technology as a whole, because it would be like a huge
Wow.
deal.
yeah, totally.
So not long after this, Dr. Ning Li then decided to part ways with the University of Alabama and start her own company, and
Smart
with
move.
a couple of other scientists who were working with her on this. And she also worked a little bit with NASA too, but they said NASA didn't have that much funding, which is interesting. The private sector was where they were pumping money into, but NASA itself didn't have enough money to basically run these experiments, which was interesting.
That makes sense.
Maybe
No, that
because
makes
No,
sense.
that totally
though.
makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
public company, and it only gets so much money. But the private sectors can hide money, and so you actually don't know how much things are costing. So, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, she starts this company called AC Gravity LLC, and then she starts looking for grants to start exploring this technology. So she obviously starts getting a lot of interest from investors at this point, because this is obviously a big deal. And like I said, this is late 90s, early 2000s now that she's broken away. But she does experience some initial problems with getting these grants from investors. And she makes this statement which kind of explains exactly what her problems were. So she says, investors want control over this technology if they buy into it. And she says this is too important. It should belong to all the American people. So she is one of these people who recognizes
Love
the
it.
potential
Yeah.
of this technology and doesn't want one company to have a monopoly over it, and
Right.
wants to release it for, everyone. Obviously, that doesn't work in the society we live in, which is
Yeah.
sucks for a lot
That
of things.
sounds
obviously.
nice, but we
Medicine
understand how
and
the world
technology
works.
in general. So you can see how this is she's starting to run into some trouble here. So interestingly enough, her final paper at the university before she left made an interesting claim that there were severe limits on what this research could possibly achieve. There was this little end section where she basically just shat all over her peer-reviewed, she didn't necessarily, but the papers that she released had this little abstract at the end where they basically said, yeah, it's a nice idea, but not at all practical, and there's no real future in this whatsoever.
Okay.
Which is a really weird statement to make if you're
Unless
about to
you were trying
dive
to hide
headfirst
something.
into this business. Right, exactly. So she makes this statement in the research papers and then decides to start a company based on this technology that apparently doesn't really work that well. That doesn't make sense. So obviously this research is really highly controversial because it kind of goes against the whole Einstein theory of relativity, right? So it's everything that modern Western science is based on. It kind of shows to be, maybe that isn't so true. So a lot of people who were studying this were pretty tight-lipped about it, just for, didn't want to be ridiculed and like blacklisted in the scientific community. But Lee was one of the exceptions, where she was like all about this. She was jumping in front of cameras and talking about it. She did talks to other universities about it. And she wasn't so tight-lipped at all. Other research into anti-gravity tech was sometimes leaked into the press, and this is the only way that the stuff was getting out. These papers were getting leaked to the press, and they were like, "Holy shit! Look at this! Look what's being done behind the scenes here." Obviously, like hyped up as this massive step in human potential, which it definitely would be, and it was only then to be quickly shut down by the scientific community. So these peer-reviewed and accepted scientific papers were suddenly being retracted and explained away by mainstream scientists. So
So
again, I said,
but I feel like because if people wanted to fund it and she wasn't giving it to them, then they have to find a way to take it without making it public, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of what it sounds to me. And then they just make people say that it's fake, and then that we don't have this potential, and then someone just takes it and does what they want with it.
Yeah,
kind of happened with Tesla.
But she didn't ever fall for that and just kind of give up on it. She kept pushing it and had, I don't know if she ever took out patents on this thing, but she must have, surely, if she started a company. I don't know. But she sort of kept running with this thing, even though she was getting this pushback, right? So, and then I was kind of thinking, like, is it, like you said, could it be that does the private sector is just trying to bully her into stealing the technology? Could it be that mainstream science is trying to, like, quash anything that kind of steps outside the box that they like to look in? Or could it be that some sort of government entity recognized the massive defense military potential in this and just like, okay, great, we don't want anyone else knowing about this, we want this for ourselves, so we're just going to discredit and quietly work on it behind the scenes. And
wouldn't be the first time.
Like
they already have it,
seems
and
like
they
that
stopped
maybe
her
happened.
because okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, that is exactly what's happening. They already have the tech. I would say it's more they want to discredit her because they already have what she came to, and they just didn't want it out there any longer.
Possibly.
Because what she's saying, we know probably existed since the 40s. Sorry, go on.
So these scientific bodies, including NASA, by the way, it was interesting that they tried to recreate. They said that they were recreating her experiments, but they failed to find what she found. So obviously, like, shutting it down, kind of thing. But it was interesting that the papers that they released were then suddenly criticized by science, saying, "Hey, you didn't actually recreate step by step what she did. You got to a point and then didn't do it, and then just said, no, it's not. There's nothing behind this." So maybe it was due to a lack of funding that they weren't able to pursue it further. But it's interesting that NASA, and in particular, said, there's nothing behind this, but they never actually recreated her exact experiments. They just kind of said, yeah, we got
never a straight answer. Never a straight answer. That's what NASA stands for.
So wait, what? So what happened? Is she
Well,
what?
I'll tell you, Melissa.
Okay.
Here's what happened.
You tell us, O'Connor.
So, it's really interesting that after these attempts to discredit all this research, Dr. Needling was given a grant from the Department of Defense to keep going. Department of Defense said, here's a bunch of money. I think it was like $500,000 initially. Keep going running with this, with your research, which is interesting for a supposed research paper that was shat on, that they said didn't work.
Right.
So the Department of Defense started investing in Ning Li. So after this, her career is kind of a mystery. After she goes into bed with the Department of Defense, we don't really hear much of her at all anymore. She just gets kind of whisked away, secreted away. And I don't mean like she was taken out, like someone shut her down, but she was like, her research herself and everything about it was just kept under wraps, basically. So AC Gravity, her company that she started, still exists today. Like, it's still up and running, so it wasn't ever shut down. And then I found like that leaks have come out a few times, different papers from leading physicists in the field, saying that they're continuing this research and making these major breakthroughs. One was mentioning like an energy beam that could create this anti-gravity field around an object, which was super interesting. It was later suggested that she was working with the Pentagon and Department of Defenses with this technology, but at some point she went back to China. Either she went back of her own accord, or I don't know. She went back to China, and the Pentagon apparently couldn't reach her after that. So this was, I guess, early 2000s or something like that. There was the video I mentioned by what was his name? The guy who made the video at the start, Barely Sociable. He has this interview with a physicist who knows some of the people in the field, and he mentions her specifically as saying she is in China now working specifically on this technology, has been for however long she's been there now, and the Chinese are apparently pumping just shitloads of money into this tech. So that got me thinking, like, obviously people have been seeing these UAPs, UFOs for much longer than the 90s. But could, like you said, Josh, could we already is it just this technology something that they just who were like, oh yeah, we know about this, but you need to shut up about it. But now the Chinese obviously have this technology. Could the threat that these UAPs face, is it possible that it is from just other nations? And, the media is saying, well, no one has this technology. We don't have this technology, so no one else has this technology. Is that true? I don't know. I don't know. But I mean, when I was listening to your story, I think that, again, we're dealing with a not very clear idea what's happening. Obviously, there's people in the government that supported her and kind of thought that what she was doing was real and needed to be investigated, whether they knew about it or not, or whether they studied, things like Roswell, if that really happened, if people really gathered technology from that. And so they knew that she was onto something, right? And then there's other factions that were like, that's just totally BS. And, we don't want anything to do with it. So she went back to China. So, I mean, I feel like there's probably some of these videos that they could be some technology that the U.S. government has that we don't know about. But there's just so much that can't be answered. I wouldn't say that they're all a government rouge, or that it's China, or that it's Russia.
If it was China or Russia over our eastern seaboard every day, like looking at us as we do our operations, it would have already been World War III. There's no way. I think they have it, Matt. I think the answer is just like everything. It's gray. They have it. Some sightings are them. I think if we did that to them, or they did that to us, and we found out, it would be game on. Like
it'd be on.
I would be pissed. Yeah, I'd be like, "What are you doing off like 2 miles off our seaboard?
Like,
why are you in the ocean? Why are you flying out of the ocean staring at me?"
What country, you guys? What country just does that and spends all that money? Every time a high-powered device gets in the sky and goes and does something for a country, that's a lot of money. So why would they do that for 2 years? Why would they just come to San Diego and hang out and fly away? Like, why? Why?
Right.
Just
It
to
doesn't
fuck
make
with
any
us?
sense.
I don't know.
Yeah, but this
Well,
doesn't
the
make
other thing
any
is
sense.
too. One of the things
Especially if
that
it's
the pilots
human,
on
human nature, human culture.
Yeah. One of the things that the pilots on the 60 Minutes video said, did they say this or am I making this up? Didn't they mention at some point that they're not, not totally sure that it is some sort of American-based military application that they don't know about?
They're saying
Because it's not like they have top secret
Well,
clearance.
I mean, they're covering all their bases, right? They said, we didn't know at the time if it was some technology that we didn't know about. Because I think we make the assumption that everybody in the military on every level knows exactly what's going on. And in any division, any company, any existence, there's only like a couple people that know what's actually going on. So, I mean, I think they were right at saying that they didn't know if that was something that they didn't have clearance to know about. So I think they were just covering themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were covering themselves, but I actually think the answer is actually yes. Based off the research I've seen coming from Greer and some of the other insiders, they're saying that all the videos we're seeing are our stuff, purposely filmed to make it seem like they're over our aircraft carriers, to make it seem like they're tracking us as a threat-based disclosure. And all that technology is out of Palmdale or one of the other like big bases. So the stuff we're actually seeing right now, the Corbell videos, all that is ours. So the answer could be yes or no. The stuff off the eastern seaboard?
It'd probably be the best way to test a technology, and I'm specifically talking about flying an object around, nuclear missiles and deactivating them. It'd be easier to test that on our own soil than it would be to fly to another country and try and do that and, potentially be shot down or something like that,
Sure, I think that's two different things, though. I think the shutting down of the nuclear is ET. I think some of the videos we're seeing over our aircraft carrier fleets is our stuff purposely done for disclosure. I don't know that. I'm just saying that's what people are saying out there in the space. Yeah. But I don't.
It's a gray area, mate. I hear what you're saying. It's a gray area.
Yeah, exactly. My point was it's a gray area.
Yeah. But look, this is all a gray area, even within the faction of we have information, do we release it or not, right? We just talked about that with Daniel Sheehan. I mean, like, the reason why no one is ever getting a clear answer is because the answer isn't clear. That doesn't mean it's not real. There's a difference. There's a difference in that answer. That doesn't mean that they're not real. It's just, it's not clear how the information is supposed to come out. So I think that governments of the world do have this technology that that this woman was working on. I think that that's been in our wheelhouse for some time. But I do believe we're dealing with something otherworldly at the same time. And so this is kind of a clash of worlds. And I think the governments are kind of scrambling to figure out how they're going to deal with it. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how it plays out. I don't know. We'll see who we get next. All right. So have a good night. Make sure you take lots of pictures in the sky of whatever you might be seeing. And make sure you send it to us or a news source so that we can keep documenting what's happening in the skies. Have a good night.
Goodbye.